Okay, I've got this new pump installed in this pickup assembly. Before we stick it back down in there, let's talk about a couple of things. So you'll notice in line there's a T. This T is unidirectional, so the gas lane can only go that direction. It's got a little arrow on the back side, so you can't mess that up. It's got two check balls in here that are spring loaded. So the first one is down here. It's going to allow the gas lane to go this way, but if for some reason there were back pressure, it's going to push that ball against the seat, and fluid cannot come back into the pump. There's also a check ball here, so if for some reason the gas flow is restricted up here and it can't push the gas up and the pump is still cycling, it's just going to open this check ball and recirculate into the tank. Okay, the second thing, in your old Toyota, if you put a new pump on there but it's not doing anything once you put the car back together and turn the key on, you might check your oil pressure. Okay, so these systems are linked to the oil pressure gauge. If the oil pressure gauge says you have no oil pressure, it's going to shut off the fuel pump, because in the event that you roll your truck over and the engine's trying to still run, but you're going to have zero pressure, then it wants to shut off the fuel supply so you're not dumping fuel onto a hot motor that's going to ignite while you're trapped in the car or whatever. There's ways around that. If you just want to run a 12-volt wire from the ignition to a toggle switch or something and then to the spade on top here to activate the fuel pump, you can do that. There are two terminals on top of this assembly. This horizontal one, this closest to us right now, comes down to the green wire, and that turns into this blue wire, and that's what is sending voltage to the fuel pump. You'll notice that on the blue wire is larger than the black. The black is the ground. It just loops back around and connects to the frame. This other spade, the vertical one, is what goes to the sending unit. So it's that red wire. Then it's got this isolator here, so it's not getting feedback from this pickup assembly. You don't want ground interference. And then it comes over to this winding, and basically as the float goes up and down, it's dragging against these little wires on the winding, and those wires are thicker and thinner, so it changes the resistance. If you were to put an ohm meter on there and exercise the float from its top position to its bottom position, you're going to see that ohm meter is going to change. If you just have it basically to measure the function, you'll put one probe of your meter on this little linkage arm, and then you can put the other probe up here on this brass, and as you move this up and down, you'll see that value change. It's not going to make a difference if you put a probe up here on the spade and then put it, to right here on this little stud. Then all you're doing is measuring the static resistance inside the wire. So your gauge is actually reading the resistance in this winding. Anyways, let's stick this thing back together and see if it works. Okay, I've got the tank in here. So the tank is back in place with the fuel pump and everything in there. It's wired up. This is the wiring harness that runs to it. I've got, looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 wires running through there. The black wire with the red stripe is the one that sends 12 volts to the fuel pump. I think the yellow wire with the red stripe is the one for your fuel gauge. So if you had to test the fuel pump, you could just use a probe and stick 12 volts into this wire, the black with the red stripe, on a, I think 75 through 78 Toyota pickup or Celica or something like that. Now from there, this harness runs up the firewall to right here. So you can see I've got a jumper wire black wire with a red stripe that goes straight to the fuel pump. Normally it's plugged in right here. Black wire with a red stripe. I disconnected it because when I turn the key on, I do not have voltage here. So it's not sending voltage to the fuel pump. So I just jumped this. I've got a hot wire directly from the battery inside the cab on the toggle switch, and it comes back with voltage right here. So now when I flip that switch, it's going to make the fuel pump live. So let's get in here and flick that switch on. Fuel pump is on. There we go. Starts up. Turn the fuel pump off. It's going to run for a minute because there's fuel in the bowl of the carburetor. That's my temporary fix. Now I have to go through the wiring and find out why I don't have 12 volts coming out of the car to send to the fuel pump.